Hey folks, welcome back to the Change Physician Podcast. This is your host, Dr. Kevin Cuccaro, with my amazing and fabulous and extraordinary co-host, Dr.
Wow.
Melissa Cady. How are you today, Dr.
I'm
Cady?
good. I couldn't believe I had 3 adjectives thrown in front of my name like that. That
Well,
was
today's a day of adjectives,
flattering.
and we gotta make sure that your stupendousness, so we'll use another one, is as appreciated as it needs to be.
Well,
So
thank you. It's super kind, and I'm gonna have to look up some fancy big words to compliment you back.
now that you did, I'm like, oh, you know what? I'm going to start pulling out a thesaurus. I'm going to pull out some crazy words, like the lowest used good adjectives out there, just
Right,
because
right.
then the listeners will be able to not only learn about change strategies and important topics and inspiring quotes, but they'll also get improved vocabulary that they can impress or at least annoy their friends and family members with. So
Exactly. Exactly.
what's your cat's name?
Zeke.
Zeke. Okay, we had a short Zeke interlude for those of you who don't realize that Zeke is the third of the co-hosts to the Change Within podcast. He is sort of more of the producer and he stays outside of the scene. I'm assuming he's usually under your desk, Melissa.
What I do is throw a piece of paper on the floor and he likes to crumple it. So he'll
Oh,
lay on the rug next to the desk on that piece of paper.
on the piece of paper. Okay, and so Zeke was very upset because we started the episode without his presence. He was banging on the door. We had to
Mhm.
pause and let Zeke in. So we would just have to take a moment and appreciate Zeke. So
Yeah. He let himself in, by the way.
he let himself in. All right.
Mhm.
Well,
Yeah.
good to have you here, Zeke. And for everybody else, I think what we were going to talk about today is another quote, and particularly what we'll go into details on this, but this is from Simone Weil, who I don't know, Weil. And the quote is this: "The future is made of the same stuff as the present." And the overall topic for that what this quote brings to mind for me is the fact that so many people are doing this delayment thing where, I'll wait until blah, I'm going to change Ben, and a year from now, then I can do something else. Oh, 10 years from now, then I can do the things that'll make me happy. Oh, if I'm only have to wait even 6 months or 2 years, and then I can change my job or start looking for a different position or think about pursuing the dreams that I had. And the reason I think this is important is that the same things that are present in this moment in time, i.e., when they say that the future is composed of the same stuff as the present, who you are, what you think, what you do, your behavior, actions, the people that you associate with, unless you start something now to change those, they're going to be the same things that are present in the future. And so this delayment process where we think we're going to change later on, or we need a specific event or a specific calendar date before we start initiate those changes, really all you're doing is delaying it because the same circumstances are going to be present at that future date as the ones that are now. So I would be appreciative of your thoughts on that, Melissa, since I think we're talking off air and we've both kind of experienced this in different ways. But what do you think about the change, whether changing now versus changing in the future?
Well, first of all, tell me the name of the person. What was
Simone, I think it's Weil, Weil. Simone Weil.
I haven't heard of that one or that person. Um, well, I find that I think it feels like it ties into the sense of control. This idea, and the way I'm slanting it is kind of like I like to organize, and not that there's not any value to these things, but like I like to feel a sense of order in areas that I'm working or I need to achieve this to feel a certain way. A lot of it has a sense of like creating and achieving really things that I have control over to feel like it'll make me happy, make me feel like I've achieved. I don't know how else to explain that. And so the problem I've found is that over the years have been accumulating, but I still feel this need. It's not quite as strong and as subconscious. I don't think I was aware of what I was doing in my 20s with that kind of approach. but it's probably the only reason I was willing to tolerate medical school and residency and fellowship and all these next hurdles. And there was probably a survival mechanism to just like get to the next step. But yet then there's that next one in front of it. And it just felt like it never stops. I think I'm more aware of this need to achieve kind of mentality. And really, I recognize that it stems from in here, like this, you could find whatever flaws that you could, that you want to, that are probably tied to that. But I recognize that it's not the stuff out here that is really what's going to bring joy. It's being okay here, and not always externalizing the sense of I need to achieve this or look a certain way, and more of achieving in my world. I don't know. I think that it makes you step back when you create this conversation and this awareness that why was I pursuing these things, and yet it may be different projects or different achievements, but it's like you keep it. They just, I don't want to say they haunt you, but they're almost like they just, this new thing appears in front of you and you go for it to make yourself feel better. And why can't you just be happy not always having to go for that thing? Does that make sense?
Well, kind of, but I think
Kind of.
because I think we flipped it a little bit. Now there's a retrospective element to this.
Yeah.
Because rather than this idea of where we have a future oriented perspective where we're looking at things and thinking, oh, I'll change next week, next month, next year, 10 years, 5 years. Once we hit that whatever definitive outcome, then things will change. The other way then to look about it is because you were kind of using this retrospective look of, well, I did residency, I did fellowship, I did this, and this very achievement drive oriented focus. The question then to ask is, has things substantially changed where you are currently as compared to where you were previously? And if so, how did that change develop? Were you doing it? Was it being, are you still dissatisfied in the same ways now as you were then? If not, what was the triggers that started to change those internal aspects? Because you brought up this external validation standpoint, like looking externally for validation or externally for a sense of achievement. And we have all changed over time. But I would be really curious is just to take a moment and say, well, look at the reasons that you've changed. What was the major drivers for them? Was it necessarily because of this pursuit of this achievement? Or were there change moments, usually pain moments, that were more critical to that change in the now that ultimately led to change in the future?
First two things that came up, if my brain is assessing it correctly. One, well, I'll have to say my relationship with my husband, I guess it was almost been together 12 or 13 years. And I was on that nonstop fast train of go, 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 achieve, achieve, achieve. And really in a life of not having deep reflection on those things, or people comfortable discussing these things, or having awareness of these things. My husband happens to be very emotionally intelligent about some of these reflections on things that I was never comfortable reflecting on. And I have to say, sometimes it felt like daggers of pain of like, this is like not physical, but the truths that were revealed to me that I recognized about myself with the help of my husband. I could, even though maybe intuitively I kind of knew, I wasn't ever willing to speak it in words and actually have a conversation about it. I think those moments, I couldn't ignore it anymore. And as I've said before, sometimes good relationships or marriages put the mirror in front of you in a loving way to let you see who you really are. And that's not always joyful. And so I think the pain of recognizing my own flaws and or how I've limited my life to this little realm of tunnel vision on achievements and projects and moving forward. It's almost like I have like grease on the bottom of the tunnel where I just keep going forward. I never really stop and reflect and don't have any windows into seeing anything else going on in the world. Those things were made very clear to me through multiple conversations and years with my husband to recognize how different we were from each other. And I think that those differences help you realize, wow, like I'm not really, these areas are not my strength at all, but I've never put attention to them. So I think that was the biggest change or inflection point in my realization. And then you start realizing how many years you can keep doing this and how tiring that same repetition can be, and how it doesn't help you in the areas that you've never worked on, such as maybe relationships and conversations and deeper, meaningful types of friendships. And so, yeah, that I guess so far this whole podcast have been reflecting on my own inadequacies in a way that were a big part of the realization and shift. Doesn't mean it's changed me completely, but I feel a little bit of an aversion to like going down a rabbit hole. And you know, I think it took a little bit of that to get through writing my book, Pandemic. Now it's just like, wow, that just seems like a lot of sacrifice, you know, to I mean, more power to people who write books, but it is a lot of work. It's just one example of many projects. But yeah, I think it took my husband to, because he's good at slowing down. I realize I need to slow down and be in the moment more versus just like flinging myself forward, and up, you know, your life just will fly in front of you and then you're on your deathbed. Like, you know, like I this is like deep conversation, but did I answer your question?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I'm never really good at directly answering your questions.
Well, I mean, here's the thing: is you get so externally focused on the achievement, right? And unless you have someone that you are willing to listen to, because you made a couple of things that I was thinking about, like a relationship in many ways is a reflection of self, and you can do it in such a way as in a loving relationship where it takes a hard look and reveals the things that you both like and you dislike within yourself in a safe and protective way that you can grow from.
Right.
Versus a detrimental, or let's just say a bad relationship where it does the same thing, but it's no longer safe, where they're reflecting back in you both the good things and the bad things, but what they're actually is amplifying the bad things about yourself and making you feel less because of them. So that's an advantage that we have if we're in a period of relationships that we can actually use to reflect and change in the moment. But if you're not willing to listen in the good or the bad, then you will, you know, and you're not willing to start making those changes in the now, and then you delay again, even 2 weeks, 5 weeks down the line, you're ultimately again going to end up where you started from. And I think it becomes extraordinarily easy to do as physicians because we have all these individual things that we can tunnel vision on and just say, well, okay, when I finish residency, things will all be different. Well, maybe, but who you are necessarily may not be, or at least may not be intentionally changed. Maybe you'll be externally changed by the pressures and things and experiences that you have. And then we have the fellowship, and then we have maybe your first job. From my own perspective, I use it as became really easy just to focus on those calendar dates, because you do medical school, you graduate. In the process there, you match into whatever your specialty is. So then the next thing is, well, now I'm going to do that. So in the residency, fellowship. Then I had Navy commitment. I'm, you know, looking at it back and saying I did the exact same thing. Is I didn't view it as this experience where I could learn and grow and really optimize more living in the present moment to appreciate things. I'm not saying I didn't appreciate anything, but I didn't use it as an opportunity to grow, because what I saw is, well, my Navy commitment ends on July 1st, 2011 or whatever it was.
Mhm.
So it became another date for me to focus on and sort of necessarily ignore. And then when you get to that date, who you are and the relationships that you're in, unless you have been intentionally designing them or intentionally working on them, are still exactly the same. And I was thinking about this as you were sort of talking, that, well, because it reminded me of, have you ever heard that Talking Head song, Once in a Lifetime? And almost everyone's like, you know, same as it ever was, same as it ever is, letting the days go by, let the water hold me down. You know, it's one where he's doing this thing. And he's like,
yeah,
where he's like, you may, you know, you get to the end, you may ask yourself, you know, this is not my beautiful house. This is, you know, me asking myself, this is not my beautiful life. And then you're like, well, how in the world did I get here? Right? Is because you got there because you weren't focusing on the things in the now. And instead you were looking so far out in the distance and future that all, again, like all of those same elements that are here today are going to be with you in the future, unless we start taking a moment to, you know, what is it about yourself that you like? What is that you actually want? Which is, I think, is an extraordinarily difficult question for some people. I'm going to raise my hands on that because I know for a fact that's one I struggle with all the time. What is it that you want? And it's a question we don't narrowly ask. But if you start looking, well, what is it that I like about myself? What is it that I want to grow with? What is it that I actually want? And then what elements do I need to work on in this moment in time? Until you start intentionally doing that and you start doing it on more of a day-to-day basis, there's a good chance wherever you end up is going to be very, 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 very similar to where you are today. And so rather than, I think that's important because so many physicians, at least in the groups, and they're chatting and we're not seeing necessarily the happy people expressing this stuff,
right.
but they're burned out and they're expecting that something magically is going to change, that, you know, they're going to, I don't know, whatever, work themselves to death, and then somehow that is going to solve all their problems in the future. And I think that's a very risky gamble to take, rather than being a little bit more intentional and trying to make, what can I do now to make today a little bit better, tomorrow a little bit better, the next day a little bit better, rather than focusing so far out in the future and say, well, when I reach next year, next date, New Year's, etc., then I'm going to start taking the steps. That's just, you know, I think we all do that. I think we all have done it, but I do think it's a very risky gamble to take.
Yeah. And I think it's a subtle expression of you're externalizing the method by which you achieve joy. And that is where I think that are, like you said, the things that are here now are still gonna be things here in the future that are issues, but you know, it's the patterning that we kind of like when you say this external thing is kind of like, I'll be happy when it happens.
And that's it. Like it's such a joke, because if you're not happy now,
yeah,
it is extraordinarily likely that once you have whatever that thing is, you're still not going to be happy.
right. Exactly. And that's the thing. You know, we talk about the changed physician, and we run patterns. We run patterns that is the reason why that down the road, even if you achieve or have this thing, you've been like I say, you run these patterns, these neural circuits, like, you know, a truck running grooves in the ground. That is your pattern of default. That is your default pattern that achieves certain things. And if you expect to have a different outcome, you got to reset those patterns. And that internal work can be excruciatingly difficult. And sometimes you need help with that. But you have to internally change to recreate those circuits to achieve something different than you've had in the past. And that is where the words we use is so important. Like, I will be happy when I get a new nose. I will be happy when I lose 20 pounds. I mean, there are things that make you feel better, but ultimately, if you don't feel satisfaction and joy within from the relationships, the world you live in, the environment you've created, um, comfortable with who you are, strengths and weaknesses. I mean, all those things, that is where the hard work is for all of us.
And that comes back to, again, the two themes or the theme that we have is the whole idea of awareness. And when you were talking, it made me think of a analogy to those super oil tankers, right? Those huge big boats that are so massive, I don't think people can understand, and have so much mass when they're filled. They have to make turns like 5 miles outside of shore in order to successfully dock someplace. And our automatic behavior is in many ways like this big, huge, loaded tanker. And the only, you cannot, that it is going to, the momentum is going to carry that ship in the direction it is heading. Now, maybe there's some external events that'll toss and tow, but it's generally going to head that passageway. But you think about the captain's this one little guy sitting on the top of the bridge. And that's where your awareness comes in, who has to be able to look out, well, what's way, way down the line? What are the actions that I'm going to take today that I can start steering this massive tanker? Because if I wait till tomorrow, I'm going to crash into the side of the thing, or I'm going to still be out in the middle of the ocean, chugging along, doing the same things as always, because you have to start like thinking now about, it makes it so difficult because we're trying to say, be aware in this moment, but you do have to be thinking in sort of these 3 time perspectives. You got to be aware and living in the present, but you have to be somewhat cognizant of what the future, where it is that you want to go, appreciative of the past moments that you have and lessons that you've learned. And so it isn't, I guess it's not one or the other, it's all 3 of them happening at the same time. The danger is when you start living in only one time perspective. Like I think I've mentioned it before, I have a tendency, which is relevant to this episode, is I live very far off in this cognitive future-oriented perspective, which that neglects this present future, which is where you find happiness. You find happiness in the moment. You don't find happiness. It's not like the magical happy place that you can just go to. It doesn't exist. Happiness is a now emotion. But yeah, it's like I this is so relevant to the change physician, is the fact that you have to be more aware and start designing intentional little actions that you can take day to day, through those actions finding joy, so that ultimately wherever you end up is going to be a better place, or at least a new place, or at least a changed place that you can further grow from.
Amen. That was awesome.
Well, that's what I planned for. I'm trying to be trailer worthy, as you told me in one of those other episodes.
You like that word? Oh, good. I'm gonna have to hyphenate and make that word up.
Yeah.
No, I think that's a good way to sum up everything that our intentions behind what this episode is for, and that we are, to truly change the trajectory or future if we want to change it.
Well, and that's true. Yeah. If
Yeah.
you want to change.
Right. And there's so many elements to change. I mean, you have to be motivated, inspired, in a lot of pain or fear or whatever it is, but the elements are still the same. You can't just expect, go buy something off the shelf to make your life change. It's going to take some work and intention behind it, and you have to develop an awareness to be able to create that trajectory that you speak of. So unless you have some other further comments, I could take us out.
Take us out.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us today on the Change Physician podcast. If you are just seeing this for the first time and don't know about our community, you can go to thechangephysician.com. Whether you're a physician or a physician ally, you can join the community and get occasional updates. Feel free to join us at any of the podcast venues and rate, review, or comment. We love to engage with our fans. And of course, I am Melissa Cady, the Challenge Doctor, with my amazing, fantastic, hilarious co-host, Dr. Kevin Cuccaro, and we'll look forward to seeing you on the next episode.
Take care, folks.